Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. My name is Xander Collins, 30 years old, a firefighter living in Missoula, Montana. If you've never been here, picture endless grasslands, rugged mountain ranges hugging the horizon, and small towns where everyone knows each other's names from the paper boy to the lady at the grocery store. I was born and raised in a tiny corner of Montana where poverty clung to my family like a shadow follows light. But don't get me wrong, I'm not telling this story to complain. I'm telling it because I want you to understand. Understand me. Understand what brought me to where I am today. And understand why my heart, though once broken, beats stronger than ever. I'm sitting here in the small room at the fire station, my fingers tracing the rim of a cold coffee mug. The wall clock ticks steadily, mingling with the faint crackle of the radio reporting a quiet day, rare, I must say. The smell of old smoke lingers on my jacket, a scent I can never fully wash out. No matter how many times I try, it's become a part of me like my childhood memories, my parents, my grandmother, and the days I thought I'd never survive. I grew up in an old wooden house on the outskirts of town with a patched-up shingle roof and windows that creaked every time the wind blew. My father, Hank Collins, was a construction worker, always grumbling about his back pain, but working tirelessly to bring home money. "Damn back's gonna snap in half one of these days," he'd mutter, lowering himself slowly into his chair at the dinner table. My mother, Ruth, worked at a nearby sewing factory where the machines hummed from dawn to dusk. "Ruth, you see that new foreman? Got no idea what he's doing," Dad would say. Mom would just sigh. I didn't look up long enough to notice. Too many orders came in today. Both worked themselves to the bone, but money was never enough. We lived in constant want, our dinners often just bread and stewed beans, with a bit of meat if we were lucky. I remember evenings at the dinner table, the dim yellow light casting shadows on my parents' weary faces, and me, a scrawny kid, eating quickly to avoid their frequent arguments. "You're too soft on him, Hank," Mom would snap, nodding toward me. "He needs to toughen up. He works all day, Ruth. Let the boy eat in peace," Dad would say, his voice gravel and exhaustion. I have a younger brother, Liam, 2 years my junior. Liam was the pride of our parents, the golden boy of the Collins family. He had bright blue eyes, a charming smile, and a confidence I never possessed. My parents poured all their attention into Liam, buying him a shiny new bike when he turned 10, making sure he got a proper education. Meanwhile, at 14, I had to drop out of school to work as a mason's assistant with my father. "You're a man now, Xander," Dad said that morning. "School's not going to put food on this table." I don't entirely blame Liam. He was just a kid, and kids don't know how to refuse being spoiled. But every time I saw him pedaling around the neighborhood on his new bike, while I trudged along on a rickety hand-me-down from the neighbor's kid, my heart twisted. Not out of jealousy, but from the sting of being overlooked, as if I wasn't truly part of the family. Like I was there, but never really seen. My childhood was a string of long days filled with sweat and dirt. I worked from dawn to dusk hauling bricks, delivering goods, cleaning yards, anything that brought in a few extra bucks to hand over to my mother. But no matter how hard I tried, my parents' eyes were always on Liam. I vividly remember one time, I must have been 15, when I accidentally broke a bowl. Just an old chipped one. It slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. My mother snapped instantly. "You're always so clumsy. Liam would never do that." I stood there, frozen, hands clenched and trembling, fighting back tears that burned behind my eyes. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper, just licked his finger and flipped the page like nothing had happened. That was the first time I truly felt invisible in my own home. But in that darkness, there was a light. My grandmother, whom I affectionately called Grandma Ruby, was that light. She lived alone in a small house about 7 miles from ours. A cozy wooden home with a crackling fireplace and the faint scent of ginger cookies always hanging in the air, like a warm hug waiting at the door. She was the only one who truly saw me, who truly listened. Whenever my parents scolded me, whenever the world felt like it was crumbling under my feet, I'd pedal my beat-up bike down those red dirt roads to her house. 7 miles wasn't a short trip for a 15-year-old with aching legs and calloused hands, but reaching her home always felt like I was crossing into a sanctuary. Grandma Ruby was a petite woman with snow-white hair, but her eyes blazed like fire, like they could see through all your hurt and still offer warmth. She always wore an old green sweater, whether it was the middle of a snowstorm or the heat of July, and she'd always have a steaming cup of tea in her hands. She told me stories about her youth, how she'd weathered storms of her own, endured loss, scraped through lean years, and kept going. "Xander," she'd say, her voice like the low hum of a lullaby, you don't need to be rich. But you must be rich in kindness. That's the one thing no one can take from you. She taught me how to face difficulties, how to hold my heart steady even when the world turned its back. She was the one who planted the seed of a dream in me, a dream to do something meaningful, to help others, to live a life that mattered. Those afternoons with her sitting on the porch swing, the wind rustling through the tall grass were the brightest moments of my childhood. I remember one time I was 16 when I showed up at her door, shoulders sagging, my shirt damp with sweat and dust clinging to my arms. I had just finished a grueling day of work. I didn't cry from the physical pain. I cried because earlier that day, my mother had looked me straight in the eye and said, "You'll never amount to anything." Grandma didn't ask a single question. She pulled me into her arms, stroked my hair the way she used to when I was small, and whispered gently, "You're a flame, Xander. One day you'll blaze, and the whole world will see your light." I didn't fully understand her words then, but they carved themselves into my heart like a promise. A quiet vow I made to myself, that I would one day be something, be someone. When I was 20, I decided to leave home. Not out of anger, but because I knew, deep down, that if I stayed, I'd disappear into the same walls that had ignored me for so long. I needed to find my own path. So I signed up to become a firefighter, a job Grandma Ruby always supported. "That's work for people with strong hearts," she told me, holding my hands between her own. "And Xander, you've always had one." I wanted to prove her right. I moved to Missoula, started training, and began working at the local fire station. Life wasn't easy. Long shifts, dangerous fires, nights lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was on the right track. Sometimes I'd lie awake until morning, my body sore, but my thoughts louder than the silence. But whenever doubt crept in, when I questioned if I'd made the right choice, I thought of Grandma, of her trusting eyes, of her voice calling me her flame. And I kept moving forward. Being a firefighter isn't just about putting out fires. It's about rushing into danger. It's about putting others' lives above your own. It's walking into chaos while everyone else is running the other way. I've saved people, terrified kids trapped in burning buildings, elderly folks pinned inside wrecked cars, their hands shaking in mine as I pulled them free. Each time I saved someone, my heart felt lighter, like I was giving back a bit of the light Grandma Ruby gave me. But deep down, I still yearned for something I've never had. Recognition. Not from the people I saved. Not from my fellow firefighters. From my family. From my parents. I know it's foolish, this hope that someday they'll look at me and see someone they're proud of. But that hope clings to me like the shadow of my childhood. No matter how far I run, it keeps up. Liam, my brother, is now 18. He didn't go to college, despite my parents pouring everything they had into him. I heard he'd gotten into bar fights, that he totaled my father's car one night after drinking too much. But my parents still defend him. Always. "He's just figuring things out," my mother told me once over the phone. "He's got a good heart." I wanted to say, "And what about me?" But I swallowed it. I don't talk to Liam much. Not because I hate him, I don't. I love him in that quiet, painful way a brother does. But every conversation between us feels like a reminder of how different our worlds have become, of how wide the gap is now. I know he needs to find his own way, just like I did. Grandma Ruby is in her 70s now, but you'd never know it. She's still strong, still optimistic. I visit her often, bringing bread and coffee. We sit on her porch, and she tells her stories like always. Her voice warm, eyes glowing. "You're still my flame, Xander," she tells me, every time I visit. And every time she says it, I feel like I can do anything. By the time I turned 28, I had been a firefighter for nearly 8 years. 8 years of facing smoke, flames, and desperate screams. 8 years of learning to stay calm when the world around me was collapsing. This job, it isn't just a profession. It's a part of me, like my breath, like my heartbeat. But no day, no training, no drill, no memory could have prepared me for what happened that afternoon. A fateful day when the fire didn't just test my body. It burned through everything I believed about myself and my family. That afternoon started like any other. I was at the fire station, wiping down the fire truck with a few of my colleagues. The smell of engine oil clung to the air, mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting from the station's small kitchen. We were laughing, teasing each other about who'd win the weekend basketball game. "I'm telling you, Stella, you're not going to land a single shot on me this time," Jason said, smirking as he tossed a rag at her. "In your dreams, old man," she shot back, grinning. The mood was light, but I always carried a faint tension with me, like a taut guitar string, just waiting to be plucked. That's what being a firefighter is like. You never know when the tone will change, when routine turns into chaos. And then it did. The alarm blared sharp, piercing, cutting through our laughter. Major fire. Lincoln High School. The dispatcher's voice cracked through the radio, urgent and loud. My heart pounded in my chest. Lincoln High. An old school, right in the heart of town. Hundreds of students would be in class at that hour. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my jacket, yanked on my helmet, and jumped onto the fire truck in under 10 seconds. Adrenaline kicked in like a jolt of electricity. Jason, Stella, rookie Tobias, and I tore out of the station, sirens screaming, red lights slicing through the afternoon sun. The dispatcher's voice came back through the radio as we sped toward the smoke rising in the distance. Fire started in the chemistry lab. Likely electrical fault. Flames spreading fast. Heavy smoke on the second floor. Students and teachers trapped. There was a tremble in his voice, a rare thing for someone who's heard it all. I glanced over at Jason, who was gripping the wheel, his jaw tight. "Xander, you take the lead." "All right," he asked, his voice low but trusting. I gave a sharp nod, though a knot of fear curled in my stomach. Leading a fire this big wasn't just a task, it was a test. A real one. But I was trained for this. I had to be. When we arrived, the scene was a nightmare. Flames erupted from the second floor of the main building, black smoke billowing out through shattered windows. Screams echoed from inside students, teachers rising above the fire's violent roar. Parents and townsfolk crowded behind the barricades, their faces twisted with panic. Some were sobbing, others shouting names, hoping for an answer that wouldn't come too late. The police had cordoned off the area, but the cries never stopped. I took a deep breath, forcing my mind to go still, to stay clear. Team 1, check the main entrance. Team 2, prep the hoses. Xander, find a way to the second floor. The chief's voice snapped through the radio, firm and quick. Copy that, I said into my mic. I strapped on my oxygen mask, checked my tank, and charged into the building with Stella and Tobias flanking me. The second we crossed the threshold, smoke swallowed us whole. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing. I could barely see 2 steps ahead. The heat slammed into us like a wall, thick, searing. Sweat poured down my back under the gear, soaking through everything. Somewhere in the distance, faint cries for help cut through the crackling and groaning of the fire. "Stay close," I shouted. "Watch your footing." The fire roared around us like a living thing, angry, wild. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Stay calm, Xander," I muttered under my breath, my voice muffled inside the mask. And then I heard it, soft, steady, strong, like it had traveled across years just to find me in this moment. Grandma Ruby's voice. "Your flame will light the way." We split up to search the classrooms. Most of the students had already been evacuated, but some were still trapped on the second floor right where the fire was spreading the fastest. The heat was brutal, the smoke a choking wall pressing in from all sides. In one of the classrooms, I found 2 teachers and 3 students huddled near the back, coughing violently from the smoke. They looked terrified, eyes wide, faces smudged with soot. "Come on, we've got to move now," I shouted over the roar of the flames, guiding them toward the emergency staircase. I handed them off to Stella, who gave me a firm nod and led them down. Just as I turned back, Tobias's voice crackled over the radio. "Xander, the library, someone's trapped in the library." The library. It was at the far end of the hallway where the smoke was thickest and the fire had already begun licking across the ceiling. My heart slammed against my ribs as I bolted in that direction, the heat intensifying with every step. The door to the library was shut tight, smoke curling out through the edges. I pressed my ear against it, heard faint coughing, weak calls for help. I stepped back and kicked the door open with everything I had. The sight inside froze me. A girl about 16 lay curled up on the floor near a bookshelf, her face pale, her chest barely rising. Her eyes were closed, her lips tinged with gray. Smoke swirled all around her, and small flames had already begun igniting the books on the nearest shelves. Kid, wake up." I dropped to my knees beside her, shaking her shoulders. She groaned softly, her eyelids fluttering, but she was fading fast. I yanked off my jacket, wrapped it around her to shield her from the worst of the heat, and hoisted her into my arms. She was light, fragile, but every step I took felt like it carried 1,000 pounds. The smoke stung my eyes, even through the mask, and my breath came in ragged pulls. I turned toward the hallway, but the inferno had taken over. Suddenly, a loud crack rang out. I looked up just in time to see a burning bookshelf collapsing toward us. I shoved the girl out of the way, but I couldn't move in time. The shelf slammed into my shoulder and head. Pain exploded through me like a blade slicing hot and deep. I dropped to my knees, vision spinning as if I were drunk or drowning. "Don't give up, Xander," I muttered, clutching at consciousness. Grandma Ruby's voice echoed in my mind, steady and warm. "Your flame will light the way." Gritting my teeth, I forced myself up, dragging the girl with me. I staggered forward, step by step, the heat searing my arms, my back, my body screaming at me to stop. Behind us, a burning beam crashed to the ground, cutting off our only exit. The hallway was a maze of fire now. But ahead, I saw a glimmer of window. I reached it, smashed the glass with my fire axe, and fresh air rushed in like a blessing. East window, second floor. I shouted into the radio. Someone's trapped. Moments later, I saw Jason's face appear outside, climbing the rescue ladder. Hang on, he yelled. I carefully lifted the girl through the window into Jason's waiting arms. My head swam, my limbs numb. You okay, Xander? He called. I didn't answer. Couldn't. The world tilted, my body giving out. I crawled out the window after her, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was on a stretcher. An oxygen mask pressed heavy against my face. The wail of an ambulance siren and the murmur of urgent voices buzzed in my ears like static. My head throbbed, a dull pounding like it was being hammered from the inside out. My arms and back burned with raw pain. Then I heard a voice. You're awake. I turned my head slowly. Stella sat beside me, her face streaked with soot, her eyes rimmed with worry and something else. Relief. You scared the hell out of us. The girl, how's the girl? I rasped. My throat felt like sandpaper, each word dragging out with effort. Stella leaned in, her eyes soft. She's fine. Thanks to you. You saved her life, Xander, she said, squeezing my hand gently. Relief swept over me like a tide. I let my eyes close, just for a second. But you're hurt bad, she added. Second-degree burns, mild traumatic brain injury. You need rest. Her words felt distant, muffled, like they were floating through water. My mind tried to piece together what had happened, the image of the girl unconscious by the bookshelf, the flames crawling up the walls, the crack of splintering wood, the crushing pain in my shoulder. It all played in my head in slow motion, flickering like an old film reel. I didn't know who she was. I didn't even know her name at the time. But I knew I had done the right thing. Grandma Ruby would be proud, I thought. The corners of my mouth turned up, a faint smile cracking through the pain. They took me to St. Patrick's Hospital. It was another world entirely, one filled with antiseptic, cold white lights, and the constant beep of machines that reminded me I was still alive. I lay there, my arms and back wrapped in thick bandages, my head buzzing with a dull, persistent ache. The doctors told me I was lucky. If the bookshelf had been a little heavier, if I'd been a few seconds slower, I might not have made it. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt empty. Like the fire hadn't just scorched my skin, it had burned something deeper. A part of who I was. The first few days passed in a haze of painkillers and restless sleep. Every time I opened my eyes, I stared at the window where Montana's golden light filtered in through the blinds, casting long slanted shadows on the wall. I'd watch dust drift through those rays like tiny particles of thought, trying not to think too hard. But I did think. I thought about the fire. About the girl Evelyn, I learned later. About the moment when I truly believed I wouldn't make it out. And more than anything, I thought about my family. My parents. I thought, maybe just maybe they'd come, hold my hand, tell me they were proud of me. I knew it was a pipe dream, but my heart refused to let go of it. The burns on my arms and back screamed every time I tried to move. The doctors said they were second degree, not deep enough to require grafts, but bad enough to keep me in the hospital for a few weeks. The brain injury left me in a fog. Sometimes my head would throb like it had its own heartbeat, and other times it just felt like a dull swarm of bees lived inside my skull. I wasn't allowed out of bed except for bandage changes or the short, shuffling walks to physical therapy. Most hours, I lay still, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting them like they held some answer I hadn't found yet. Stella and Jason came by often. The nurses always smiled when they saw them, like they were part of the family. One afternoon, Stella walked in with a box in her hands. Brought you something, she said. She opened the lid and grinned. Not as good as your grandma's, but they'll do, she said, placing the cookies on the bedside table with a wink. I managed to smile. Smells better than hospital food, that's for sure. Later, Jason pulled up a chair beside me. His uniform still smelled faintly of smoke, and his voice carried that easy steadiness I'd leaned on more times than I could count. He launched into a story about the station, how Tobias, the rookie, still turned pale anytime someone mentioned Lincoln High. Swear the kid almost dropped a whole tray of tools yesterday, he said, chuckling. Then he turned to me, serious now, and placed a hand on my shoulder gently, carefully, so he wouldn't touch the burns. You're a hero, Xander, Jason said, patting my shoulder gently to avoid my wounds. I gave a weak smile, unsure how to respond. A hero, I said softly, my throat still raw. I just did what any firefighter would do. Stella didn't argue. She just gave my hand another squeeze before slipping out to give me some rest. Grandma Ruby came, of course. She arrived on the third day, just as I was waking from a long, sedative-induced sleep. The room was quiet, the sun slanting through the blinds, and then I saw her standing there like she always had in my memories. Her familiar green sweater clung to her small frame, her white hair pulled back neatly, her eyes blazing like fire. "My flame," she whispered as she came to my bedside, reaching for my hand. Her voice trembled, but it was filled with pride. "You've made me so proud, Xander." I squeezed her hand, blinking fast, fighting back the tears that rushed to the surface. No matter how many times I heard her say that, it still hit me like a wave I couldn't brace for. She sat down beside me and told me everything, how the story had made it into the local paper, how the whole town was talking about me. "They're calling you a hero," she said with a soft smile. "But I know you don't need titles. You did it because of your heart." She stayed all afternoon, telling stories about her youth, about how she used to walk 5 miles in the snow just to get to work, how she patched up her siblings' clothes with thread and patience, how she never let anyone else decide her worth. I lay there listening, and for a while, I wasn't in the hospital. I was back on those old red dirt roads, biking to her house with the wind on my face, seeking refuge from a world that never seemed to make space for me. Before leaving, she reached into her worn canvas bag and pulled out a small napkin-wrapped bundle. "Eat it," she said, placing the ginger cookie on the table beside my bed. "You need strength." Then she ruffled my hair the way she used to when I was a boy. "And remember, Xander, you're still my flame." I watched her leave, her silhouette small but powerful as it disappeared through the hospital door. And I told myself that as long as I had her, I could get through anything. But my family, my parents and Liam, that was a different story. On the second day in the hospital, once the doctors finally allowed me to use the phone, I called my mother. I don't know why, really. Maybe a part of me still hoped for something more. Hoped for warmth where there'd always been cold. I lay there with the IV dripping into my arm, my body aching, my voice weak as I held the phone to my ear. "Mom," I said, trying to steady my tone, "I'm hurt. I was in the Lincoln High fire. I'm at St. Patrick's Hospital. Can you come?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then a sigh. When she spoke, her voice was distant. "Cold. Why'd you risk your life for strangers, Xander? So reckless. We're busy dealing with Liam. He got into a fight at a bar. Got beat up bad." She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't say she was glad I was alive. "You take care of yourself there," she added, like a tossed-off chore. I heard my father mutter something in the background, couldn't make out the words, and then she hung up. The phone slipped from my hand and landed on the bed beside me. I stared at it, but all I could feel was the pain, not from the burns, not from the buzzing in my head, but from my chest, my heart squeezed tight like it was being wrung out. I'd known it was coming. I'd grown used to their indifference. But this time, it still hurt, like a fresh cut on an old scar. I dialed Liam next. Maybe he'd care. Maybe my brother would ask if I was okay. He picked up after a few rings. His voice was groggy, like I'd woken him up or interrupted something. "You okay, bro?" he mumbled. Good. Mom's pissed about my stuff, so, we're kind of busy." I hung up without another word. Just silence. The kind that clings to your ribs and settles into your bones. I turned my head toward the window. The sunlight was fading, painting the walls in soft gold that somehow made the room feel even more hollow. And in that quiet moment, I felt like that lost kid again, watching Liam ride his shiny new bike, while I trudged along behind on my rickety hand-me-down. The days that followed blurred into one another, an endless loop of physical and emotional pain. Nurses came in and out, changing my dressings with clinical precision. Each time they peeled off the old bandages, I clenched my jaw so hard it felt like my teeth might crack. The burns were red and angry, the blisters a map of where the flames had touched me. The doctors reassured me that I'd heal, that the scars would fade with time. But I knew better. Some scars never fade. The head injury made everything harder reading, focusing. Even holding on to thoughts felt like trying to catch smoke with my hands. And every now and then, memories of the fire would crash over me without warning. I'd feel the smoke in my lungs again, hear the roar of flames and the groan of collapsing wood. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a fist inside my chest. But what hurt more than all of that, more than the burns, more than the memories, was the silence. The silence from my family. Every day I waited. For a call, a text, a message, something, anything. Some small sign that I mattered to them, that they were proud, that they saw me. Nothing ever came. I wondered if they'd even read the papers, if they'd heard what the town was saying. The whole of Missoula knew about the Lincoln High fire, about the firefighter who went back in, who dragged a girl out through smoke and flame, about me. Yet the people who should have cared the most acted like I didn't exist. One afternoon, as I struggled through physical therapy trying to lift a tiny weight that might as well have been a cinder block, the nurse approached with a gentle expression and a phone in her hand. "Someone's calling for you, Xander," she said softly. My heart jumped. I sat up straighter. Was it Dad? Mom? Maybe even Liam? I took the phone, my voice trembling. "Hello, Xander, it's me, Grandma Ruby." Her voice crackled through like the sound of her fireplace on cold nights. I smiled. I couldn't help it. But beneath that smile, I couldn't hide the flicker of disappointment. She told me the town was organizing a fundraiser for Lincoln High, that they wanted me to speak once I was better. "You're Missoula's pride," she said, warmth in every syllable. I'll try," I said quietly. "Thanks, Grandma." But when I hung up, the hollowness returned. She was my light, my anchor, but part of me still craved a flicker of warmth from the people who were supposed to love me first. Then, one day around the second week in the hospital, a nurse knocked on my door. "Xander, you have a visitor," she said, her voice careful, like she was delivering news with weight. I sat up quickly, smoothing down my messy hair, hope springing foolishly in my chest. Was it them? But when the door opened, it wasn't my parents. A tall man in a sharp black suit walked in. Beside him was an elegant woman in a pale blue dress. And behind them a girl, blonde hair tied high, blue eyes I'd seen wide with fear in a smoke-filled room. Evelyn, the girl from the fire. I recognized her instantly, though now she looked vibrant, her skin no longer pale, her frame no longer weak. "Hello, Mr. Collins," the man said, his voice warm, but with the quiet authority of someone used to being listened to. "I'm Edmund Hartman. This is my wife, Miranda, and our daughter, Evelyn." He extended his hand. I reached out and shook it, still a little dazed. "Hartman," I echoed, the name faintly familiar. My brain, still foggy from the trauma, couldn't quite place it. Evelyn stepped forward then. She held out a small box, wrapped in blue paper with a gold ribbon. Her hands trembled slightly as she offered it to me. "Thank you, Xander," she said, her voice barely audible. "If it weren't for you, I don't know if I'd be here." She bowed her head, her cheeks flushing pink as she held out the little box. "It's not much," she said, barely meeting my eyes. "But I hope you like it." I took it gently, my fingers fumbling a little as I peeled away the paper and opened the lid. Inside was a simple leather bracelet, dark brown and slightly worn, with a single word engraved into the band: courage. Something about that word, that gesture, struck deeper than I expected. I smiled, slowly slipping it onto my wrist, the leather snug against my skin. It wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder of that moment in the library, of why I ran in, and what it meant. "Thank you, Evelyn," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "I was just doing my job. I'm really glad you're okay." Mr. Hartman stepped forward, his posture stiff, but his eyes filled with something softer: gratitude, maybe even awe. "No, Mr. Collins," he said, his tone firm. "You didn't just do your job. You put your life on the line to save my daughter. We owe you a debt we can never repay." Beside him, Miranda nodded, her eyes shimmering. "Evelyn is everything to us," she said, placing her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Thank you. From the bottom of our hearts." I shifted in the bed, suddenly uncomfortable under so much praise. I wasn't used to it. I scratched the back of my head, unsure what to say. I didn't think much about it, I muttered. I just wanted to get her out safely. Mr. Hartman gave a small smile, but his eyes never wavered. "You're a remarkable man, Xander." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, holding it between two fingers. "When you're fully recovered, come by my office." "All right. I'd like to talk more." I nodded slowly, taking the card and glancing at it. I didn't know what the visit meant, not yet, but something told me it was important. They left a few minutes later, Evelyn giving me a small wave as she walked out, the bracelet still warm on my wrist. And when the door shut behind them, I was left with that card, the bracelet, and a strange cocktail of gratitude, awkwardness, and curiosity. A few days later, just as the sun dipped below the mountains and cast long shadows across the floor, a nurse knocked again. "Xander," she said, poking her head in, "you have another visitor." My heart leapt, foolishly. I sat up straighter, quickly smoothing my hair, swallowing the sudden tightness in my throat. "Is it my—" I didn't finish the question. But when the door opened, it wasn't them. It was a reporter, badge clipped to his collar, notepad in hand, eager expression on his face. "Mind if I ask you a few questions, Mr. Collins? The town's been talking about what you did." "I'm tired," I said, cutting him off, my voice hollow. "Not today." He nodded, looking a little disappointed, and quietly backed out of the room. The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing on my chest. Every day I held on to hope, and every day it slipped further from reach. Not even a missed call. Not even a single word of concern from my parents. As the days passed and I grew stronger, the burns on my arms and back began to heal, the angry red skin turning dry and tight, leaving scars that would stay with me. My head buzzed less, and I could finally walk again without help. My body was mending. But the wound in my heart, that was another story. That wound smoldered. Quiet. Persistent. Like a fire you think is out, but the embers are still glowing underneath. On the morning of my discharge, Grandma Ruby came early. She entered the room with a bouquet of wildflowers from her garden, their scent instantly reminding me of all the peaceful afternoons I spent curled up on her couch, listening to stories, finding the strength I never got at home. "You've done something great, Xander," she said, taking my hand in both of hers. "But remember, you did it for yourself. For your heart. Not for anyone else." I nodded slowly, her words sinking in, warm and heavy. She was right. I knew she was. But somewhere deep inside, that ache still lingered. That longing to hear my own mother's voice telling me she was proud. I looked at the drawer beside my bed before leaving. Inside it sat Mr. Hartman's business card, tucked beside Evelyn's bracelet. I didn't know what would come of it. But something was shifting. A change was coming, like a new wind blowing across the Montana fields. And then it was time. The nurse wheeled me to the hospital entrance, but I insisted on walking the last few steps. The moment I pushed open the glass doors, the Montana sky greeted me crystal clear, sunlight warm and golden, streaming through the towering pine trees that lined the road home. "Time to go home, my flame," Grandma Ruby said, her fingers gently holding mine as I stepped out of the hospital. My legs were still shaky from days of lying in that hospital bed, the muscles not yet used to carrying me again. But I walked slow and steady and hugged Grandma Ruby tightly, grounding myself in the warmth of the small woman who had always been my guiding light. In my pocket, I carried two things: Mr. Hartman's business card and the leather bracelet Evelyn had given me, engraved with the word courage. They weren't just objects. They were reminders. Proof that even though my own family had turned their backs on me, there were still people who saw me, valued me, believed in me. When I got back to my modest apartment in Missoula, it felt like stepping into a quiet memory. The couch cushions sagged, the table was nicked from years of use, and a single framed photo sat near the window, me and Grandma Ruby, arms slung over each other's shoulders, smiling like the world had never hurt us. The burn scars on my arms and back still ached, the skin tight and raw, but the doctors had said with time and patience I could return to work. Still, I wasn't rushing. Firefighting was part of me. But the Lincoln High fire had carved a deeper scar than the ones on my skin. It had forced me to face the weight I'd been carrying for years, my need to prove something to people who may never see me. So instead of returning to the firehouse, I spent my days at Grandma Ruby's. Her porch overlooked a field that stretched far enough to forget everything. We sat there for hours, coffee in hand, watching wild horses gallop across the horizon, their manes catching the sunlight like flames. She told me stories, updates about the neighbors, and how the town was still buzzing about the fire. She mentioned the thank you letters from parents, read aloud parts of a newspaper article that called me a quiet hero. "You did something great, Xander," she said one afternoon, her eyes sparkling over the rim of her mug. "But I know you didn't do it for fame. You did it because of your heart." I smiled. A small one. But my chest ached with the weight of silence from my parents. From Liam. I hadn't called them again. They hadn't called me. It felt like a wound that refused to close. Some part of me, some foolish, stubborn part, still wanted to believe they'd come around. That maybe one day they'd show up on my doorstep and say, "We were wrong." But most days, I knew better. About a month after being discharged, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of coffee and that white business card with the clean black lettering. Edmund Hartman. No company. No title. Just the name and an address in downtown Missoula. The kind of card that didn't need to explain itself. It sat there every day, tucked under bills and grocery lists, quiet, waiting, like it was daring me to act. I picked up the phone, cleared my throat, and dialed the number. My voice was hesitant. "Hello, Mr. Hartman. This is Xander Collins. You said I should come by when I was better." "Xander." His voice boomed through the line, deep and certain. "Glad to hear from you. Are you feeling better?" "I am," I replied, unsure of what else to say. "Great. Can you come by my office this afternoon at 3 o'clock? We have a lot to discuss." I agreed, though curiosity twisted inside me like a wire pulled too tight. What did he want? Another thank you? Something more? I couldn't tell, but I needed to find out. I pulled on my only clean blue shirt, ran a comb through my still messy hospital hair, and threw on a baseball cap. My pickup coughed and rumbled as I drove it downtown, past the streets I knew, into a part of Missoula that felt like another world entirely. The address led me to a tall, modern glass building, sleek and spotless. The kind of place where the air smelled like money. I parked around the corner and walked in, feeling wildly out of place in my jeans and boots. A young receptionist smiled at me from behind a marble desk. "Mr. Collins?" she asked. I nodded, shifting awkwardly under her gaze. "Mr. Hartman is expecting you. Right this way." She stood and led me down a long, polished hallway to a spacious office. Mr. Hartman stood from behind a large, polished wooden desk and extended his hand, his grip firm but warm, the kind of handshake that felt sincere. "Xander, thank you for coming," he said, motioning to a leather chair across from him. "Sit down. Coffee. Water. Coffee. Thank you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though my nerves jittered beneath the surface. As I sat, I glanced around the office. Abstract paintings hung on the walls, muted and tasteful, and a massive window stretched behind him, offering a sweeping view of the distant Montana mountains. The entire room radiated wealth, but not loud or flashy. It was refined, quiet, nothing like the homes I'd grown up in. Mr. Hartman took his seat, folding his hands on the desk as he looked at me with a blend of curiosity and genuine concern. "Are you fully recovered?" he asked. "I know you were badly hurt saving my daughter." "Still sore," I said, subconsciously touching the bracelet on my wrist, the leather warm from my skin. "But I'm okay. Thank you for asking." He nodded, then fell silent, his gaze distant for a moment as if searching for the right words. "Xander," he began again, his voice quieter now, more deliberate. "I want you to know that my family owes you an immense debt. Evelyn, she's our everything. If it weren't for you," he shook his head slowly, "I don't know how we would have gone on." I shifted in my seat, the praise uncomfortable. "I was just doing my job, sir," I said, my voice lower than before. "Any firefighter would have done the same." "No," he said firmly, his eyes steady. "Not everyone would." He leaned forward slightly, his tone filled with something weightier now. "You ran into that fire knowing the risks. You found my daughter when the building was coming down around you. That's not just a job. That's courage. That's heart." He paused, locking eyes with me. I found myself holding my breath. "I looked into your background," he continued. "A young man from a small Montana town, raised in hardship, working since you were a teenager to help your family. No fancy degrees. No head start. You didn't have much, but you gave everything. To save others. That's rare, Xander." His words landed like stones in my chest. They reminded me of Grandma Ruby, of those porch conversations, of the way she always saw in me what I struggled to see in myself. I swallowed, not sure what to say. "Thank you. But I didn't do it expecting anything in return." "I know." He smiled gently, as if he'd been waiting for that answer. "And that's why I want to do this." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it in front of me. The paper was heavy, crisp, its weight somehow intimidating. "This is a gift from our family," he said. "Not to repay you, no gift could ever do that, but to help you start anew. To have a better life." I stared at the envelope for a second, my pulse drumming in my ears. My fingers trembled as I opened it and peeked inside. My eyes widened. A check. $5 million. The number didn't seem real. My mind scrambled to comprehend it, but it was like trying to hold smoke. I looked up at him, stunned. "Sir, I can't accept this," I stammered. "It's too much. I didn't do it for money." He raised a hand, calm but firm. "Xander," he said, his voice measured, "I know you didn't do it for money. But think of it this way." He leaned forward, eyes intent. "You gave Evelyn a chance to live. And we want to give you a chance to live the life you deserve. You can do so much with this for yourself, for those you love, for the community. It's your choice." His words echoed in my head long after I left the building. I sat in my truck, the check heavy in my pocket, like it carried not just money, but a weight I wasn't sure how to hold. $5 million. I kept turning it over in my hand as I drove back through Missoula's familiar streets, barely noticing the lights or the people crossing. I wasn't thinking about what I could buy or where I could go. I was thinking about Grandma Ruby, about her patched roof, about the old green sweater she wore in every season, about the cookies she baked even when we barely had enough flour. I was thinking about the nights I came home covered in cement dust, too tired to even speak. The bowls of beans and bread, the sound of my parents arguing as I tried to eat quickly and disappear, Liam laughing in the next room, his bike leaning shiny and untouched by the door. The money could change everything. It could fix Grandma Ruby's roof. It could help kids like me who never got a real chance. It could give me options I never even dared to imagine. But still a knot sat in my chest. I feared it. Not because I didn't need it, but because I feared what it might do to me. Would I start thinking I was better than others? Would I forget the lessons of hard work, of compassion, of service? What would Grandma Ruby say? That evening, I sat in the field on the edge of town, engine off, headlights dim. The sun dipped behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and red. I rolled the check between my fingers. "You don't need to be rich," I whispered, hearing her voice in my mind. "But you must be rich in kindness." I didn't tell her right away. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I needed time. Time to figure out who I was with this gift, and who I wanted to be. A few days later, I stood on her porch, the same porch I'd biked to 100 times as a kid with scraped knees and a heavy heart. She opened the door before I knocked. Your face is too full for secrets, she said, smiling as she ushered me in. We sat at her kitchen table, mugs of tea steaming between us. The smell of cinnamon hung in the air. I met with Mr. Hartman. I began slowly. He gave me something. A check. She didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. How much? She asked gently. 5 million, I said, barely able to get the words out. She reached across the table and placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip steady and warm. Her eyes didn't widen with shock. They just softened with pride. Xander, she said, her voice as steady as it had always been, you deserve that gift. And I know. She squeezed my shoulder. You'll use it wisely. I nodded, feeling a weight lift as I shared with her. What do you think I should do? I asked. She smiled and reached over, ruffling my hair the way she used to when I was a boy with scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks. Do what makes you feel alive, Xander. In the days that followed, I carried those words like a compass. I'd find myself staring at the safe in the corner of my bedroom, its small steel door holding more than just money. It held responsibility, possibility, and a haunting kind of pressure. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That check wasn't just a number on a piece of paper. It was a test. I thought of 1,000 things. A new home for Grandma Ruby, somewhere warm and quiet where her roof didn't leak every spring. A community fund, something for the bricklayers, the janitors, the kids who worked 3 jobs just to help keep the lights on. I thought of Evelyn and her parents, their gratitude, their kindness, and how that moment in the fire had shifted something deep inside me. And I thought of my own family. My mother, my father, Liam. People I still loved, even if their love had never come wrapped in warmth or kindness. After a week of restless nights and long conversations with Grandma Ruby, I decided I couldn't let the check stay locked up anymore. Letting it sit there felt like I was avoiding everything it represented. So I took it out carefully, unfolded it, the crisp paper cool against my fingertips, and tucked it into the inside pocket of my old firefighter jacket. Then I drove to the only bank I'd ever trusted, First Interstate Bank, right in the heart of Missoula. I'd opened an account there when I first started with the department. Back then, my paychecks were barely enough to scrape by. Funny how life turns. It was a Wednesday, cold enough that the air burned my lungs, and my breath curled into the sky like smoke. I pulled my baseball cap low. Even though it had been weeks, the news stories hadn't faded. The headlines still floated in my head. Firefighter saves teen in blaze, Missoula's hero. I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt exposed. Inside the bank, it was warm and smelled faintly of paper, ink, and the scent of old carpet. I joined the short line, my hands shoved into my jacket pockets, fingers brushing the edges of the check. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the counter. A young teller greeted me with a bright smile. Her dark hair was tied up high, and her nails were painted a soft lavender. Hi there. How can I help you? She asked cheerfully. I hesitated, then slid the check across the counter. I'd like to deposit this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She picked it up, scanning it casually. Then her eyes froze, widening as they darted from the check back to me. You're Xander Collins, aren't you? She asked, her voice hushed now, trembling just a little. The firefighter who saved that girl in the Lincoln High fire. I gave a slow nod. Yeah, that's me. Her smile grew, now touched with awe and something close to nervousness. Just a moment, please, she said, her tone more formal now. For this amount, I need to get the manager. She disappeared behind a frosted glass door, and I stood there feeling the eyes in the lobby turn toward me like heat lamps. Someone whispered the word hero. I shifted on my feet, uneasy in the attention. The manager emerged soon after, a middle-aged man in a gray suit and polished shoes. His eyes were kind, though, and his handshake firm. Mr. Collins, he said, it's an honor to meet you. We've all read about you in the papers. I gave a tight smile, unsure of what to say. He gestured for me to follow him and led me down a hallway into a small private office. I'll handle this transaction personally, he said, motioning for me to take a seat. We sat across from one another at a desk. He slid a stack of forms toward me and explained the protocols for handling a deposit of that size: security, transfer options, investment advisories. I nodded through most of it, signing where he pointed, my mind only half there. $5 million, he said, lowering his voice slightly. A gift from the Hartman family, correct? I nodded again, not wanting to delve into details. Yes, they wanted to thank me, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. The bank manager gave a knowing smile. A well-deserved gift, he said, leaning back slightly. But I'm guessing you didn't do it for the money, did you? I gave a faint smile, not responding. When I left the bank, my account held an additional $5 million, but I didn't feel different. Not in any way that mattered. I was still Xander Collins, still wearing my old jacket, still driving my beat-up truck, still carrying the scars of a boy who once biked 7 miles just to feel like he mattered. News of the checks spread faster than I could have imagined. I don't know how the press found out. Maybe it was the teller, or maybe someone in Mr. Hartman's office let something slip. Either way, just days later, a local paper ran a story with the headline, Missoula hero receives $5 million from tycoon family. They recounted the fire, my actions, and the Hartmans' generous gift. They didn't mention Evelyn by name, thankfully, respecting the family's privacy. But by then, the whole town knew who it was. The Hartmans, as I came to learn, were a wealthy but private family. They owned real estate developments and agricultural businesses throughout Montana, yet they rarely appeared in the media. Their gesture toward me had ignited a fire of its own this time in people's mouths, not buildings. Missoula buzzed with the news. My phone didn't stop ringing. Colleagues from the fire station, neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in years, everyone called. They congratulated me, asked what I planned to do with the money. A few joked that maybe now I could finally get rid of the iron horse I called a truck. I laughed with them, but inside, I felt a pressure building. The money wasn't just an opportunity, it was a burden. A heavy one. I feared I wouldn't use it right. Feared I'd let the weight of it crush everything Grandma Ruby had tried to build in me. Kindness, humility, purpose. And then, just as I dreaded, my family resurfaced. 2 days after the article ran, my phone lit up with a call I hadn't expected but should have seen coming. Mom. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My heart raced, but not with joy. I wasn't sure what I felt. Nausea maybe, or dread. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, Mom. Xander. Her voice came through unnaturally sweet, the kind of voice she used when company was over or when she wanted something. Are you doing okay? I heard you got a big gift from that rich family. $5 million, right? I gripped the phone tighter. There was a weight pressing on my chest, like the pressure in my oxygen tank back during the Lincoln High fire. Yeah, I said coldly. How do you know? Oh, the whole town's talking about you, she said, laughing lightly. But I could hear the falseness in her tone, like someone trying to pretend they cared. Your dad and we're so proud. You did something big, Xander. Why didn't you tell us? I bit my lip. My throat tightened. Proud. They hadn't visited me in the hospital. Hadn't called when I'd nearly died saving a stranger's daughter. Not a word. And now, with money in the picture, suddenly they were proud? I've been busy, I said flatly, keeping my voice even. What's this about? Well, she hesitated, her tone shifting. I just thought, our family's not exactly well off. Liam's in a tough spot. Got into some trouble. Needs money to pay off debts, start over. I figured you could share a little. Help your brother out. Family comes first, right? I stayed silent. My heart twisted, not with guilt, but with disbelief. Family comes first. Coming from the woman who called me reckless while I was hooked up to machines in a hospital bed. I'll think about it, I said, my voice sharp now, final. And I hung up before she could say more. That evening, Dad called. He didn't waste time with small talk. That wasn't his style. His voice was flat, but I could tell he was trying to sound composed, maybe even gentle. It came off as stiff unnatural. Xander, he said, clearing his throat. Your mom told me about the money. I waited. I already knew where this was going. What are you planning to do with it, he asked. Your mom thinks we should buy a new house for the whole family. Liam needs a stable place too. Then came the line that always seemed to fall from his lips when they needed something from me. Son, you're the older brother. You've got to look out for him. I clenched my fist, my nails digging into my palm. Dad, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. I haven't decided anything yet. But if I do something, it'll be for the people who actually care about me. He went quiet. The silence on the line stretched. Then, with a sharpness that didn't surprise me, he muttered, You're being ungrateful. Click. I hung up. I sat there, my jaw tight, a storm brewing in my chest. Anger, pain, disbelief. It was the same old pattern like clockwork. When I was a kid, they ignored me. When I nearly died, they didn't call. But now that there were dollar signs attached to my name, I was suddenly useful again. A few hours later, Liam reached out. No call, just a text. Bro, heard you hit the jackpot. Congrats. Can you help me out? I'm in a bind. I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen. Liam wasn't evil, not like our parents. But he was weak. Lost. He'd been fed on praise and excuses his whole life. Never taught how to own his mistakes. Part of me still wanted to help him, but not like this. I typed back. When you're ready to talk seriously, call me. Then I turned off my phone. That weekend, I went to Grandma Ruby's. I brought a fresh loaf of sourdough and a jar of the dark roast she liked, just like I used to when I was a teenager needing her warmth. She sat on the porch in her wooden rocking chair, a thick sweater wrapped around her shoulders despite the sun. She looked at me before I even spoke, those sharp eyes narrowing with knowing. You're having trouble with your family, aren't you? She asked gently. I sat beside her and nodded. I told her everything: the calls, the guilt tripping, the ask from Liam. She didn't interrupt, just listened, her hands folded over her knee. When I finished, she placed a hand on my shoulder and looked me straight in the eye. "Xander," she said, "you don't owe them anything. You've given them everything: your love, your sacrifice. If they can't see your worth, that's their fault, not yours." I let out a shaky breath, the weight in my chest easing just a bit. "But I still want to help Liam," I admitted. "He's my brother." She smiled, soft and proud. "Then help him your way, not theirs. You have a big heart, Xander. Don't let them take advantage of it." In the days that followed, her words stayed with me. I began to think differently, not about how to protect myself, but about how to build something real, something lasting, something I could be proud of. I used part of the money to buy a home, a comfortable house on a small hill at the outskirts of Missoula, overlooking a quiet valley. It was a wooden home with a red-tiled roof, large windows that let in the Montana light, and a garden big enough for Grandma Ruby to plant wildflowers just like the ones that used to grow behind her old house. I remembered the day I brought her to see it for the first time. She stepped out of the truck slowly, her eyes scanning every inch of the place. Her hand found mine. "This is the place I've always dreamed of," she whispered, squeezing my fingers. "But you, Xander, you are my real home." We moved in together on a cool spring morning. The air was fresh, wildflowers beginning to bloom across the fields like nature's confetti celebrating a second chance. I'd adopted a rescue dog, a wiry, stubborn mutt with soft brown eyes and a playful spirit. I named her Ember. Fitting, I thought, for something born out of fire. Each morning, I brewed coffee for Grandma, just the way she liked it: strong, no sugar, splash of cream. We'd sit together on the porch as the sun ruby, its golden light spilling over the valley. Ember would curl up at my feet, her tail flicking gently with the breeze. It was simple, and for the first time in my life, I felt joy. Real, honest joy. With the rest of the money, I started the Ruby Collins Fund, named for the woman who had always been my light, my compass. The mission was clear: support low-income workers who'd been injured on the job. Firefighters, factory workers, farmers, people like me. We paid medical bills. We gave grants for job retraining. We helped families keep their homes. I wasn't doing it alone. Mr. Hartman connected me with advisors and lawyers, people who knew how to keep things tight and clean. Every time we helped someone, every thank you letter I read, that quiet flame in my chest grew a little stronger. I stayed in touch with the Hartmans. Evelyn visited now and then, her spirit brighter with each passing year. She told me about school, about her dream of becoming a journalist. "You'll be amazing," I told her one afternoon as we sat on the porch, sipping lemonade. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You're like my big brother," she said softly. It meant more than I could say. Mr. Hartman became something of a mentor. He'd call or invite me to his office every few months, not to talk about money, but about purpose. "You're doing it right, Xander," he told me during one meeting, his tone calm but proud. "You're making a difference, not just for yourself, but for the community." Liam finally called one evening. His voice was low, hesitant. For once, there was no entitlement in it. Just a man who'd hit bottom. "Xander, I've been living all wrong. I want to change, to do something good like you." I didn't say anything right away, but eventually, I told him about one of the job training programs funded by the Ruby Collins Fund. I enrolled him, paid his way, and when I met him outside the center the next week, I saw a flicker in his eyes I hadn't seen since we were kids. Hope. Will he change? I don't know, but I hope so. I really do. My life isn't perfect, but it's whole. Each day I wake beside Grandma Ruby, with Ember wagging her tail and Montana's endless sky stretching above. I feel something I once thought was out of reach. I feel alive. Truly alive. And that is the greatest gift I could ever receive. Right now, I'm sitting on the porch, watching the sun melt into the horizon, staining the valley gold. Ember lies at my feet, twitching in a dream. Grandma Ruby is out in the garden, watering the wildflowers with a gentle smile. I think about the fire, about the library, about Evelyn, about the calls from my parents and Liam, about everything that led me here. No, my life isn't a fairy tale, but it's a story, one built on kindness, on resilience, and on rediscovering my worth. If you ask me for advice, I tell you this: live with an open heart, but don't let anyone take advantage of your kindness. Set boundaries with those who hurt you, even if they're family, and find joy in the simple things. A quiet morning, a laugh from someone you love, a thank you from someone you've helped, or a sunset that reminds you the world keeps turning, no matter what's behind you. Life doesn't promise to be easy, but it's always worth fighting for. I look up. Grandma Ruby is holding a wildflower, waving at me from across the garden. Ember wags her tail, and my heart feels warm. I've walked through fire literally and figuratively, and I've found a home. Not just in this wooden house on the hill, but in my own heart. I hope you find your home too, no matter how long or hard the road may be. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.